I'm Joel McCower here in Studio C with David Addison from VERGE. David, tell us about the VERGE Earth Challenge.
So the Earth Challenge was actually Richard's wife's idea. He was talking to her about climate change and sea level rise and how there was already too much carbon in the atmosphere and all that sort of thing. And she turned to him and said, well, if it's such a big deal and there's already too much carbon up there, as well as cutting emissions, are there also ways of taking carbon out again? You know, there are a lot of intelligent, kind of aspirational people around the planet. You know, is there some way of incentivizing people to come up with sustainable ways of extracting carbon out of the air?
And Richard, of course, for the one or two people in the world who may not know, that's Richard Branson you're talking about. What is the challenge? What are you trying to get people to do, and what do they get for doing that?
Sure. Well, I think it was inspired by the historic innovation prizes like the Longitude Prize and the X Prizes and that sort of thing. And whilst the particular pathway and method to getting to that goal might not be really clear today, it's getting increasingly clear that it's maybe a problem that does need to be looked at. So I think they just basically agreed, well, why don't we put up a big innovation prize for this area? And such, the Earth Challenge was launched back in 2007.
Does the world need more innovation to address climate change? Or it seems that we already know a lot of what needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the really key message, almost paradoxically, with taking carbon out of the atmosphere is that the main event is still cutting emissions in the first place. And there are some quite nice parallels actually between there being as many interesting industrial ways of doing it as there are natural and ecological ways, and it's not really an either or. You know, these are often quite complementary things in the very diverse world we live in. But I think it's interesting how often in the kind of wider discourse this area doesn't really get talked about, or if it does, it gets talked about as a sort of a get out of jail free card or a sort of magic bullet kind of thing, rather than just other ways of mitigating and adapting to climate change. It just happens to be a net carbon drawdown rather than a net carbon abatement in the first place.
Well, Paul Hawken's been talking about carbon drawdown.
Right.
Is this what you're looking for? Is solutions that reduce carbon, and where do you think the big opportunities are?
Well, I think actually, essentially, our argument is that when you really get down into the detail, there are still kind of questions and amber lights to be answered in each of these areas, from the economics of the more industrial systems to actually the monitoring and quantifying the removal in your natural ones. But that's just because there are those uncertainties. It's not an excuse for not starting to work out how you look at them in a measured and risk managed way. And often we found that a lot of the other kind of organisations out there, from NGOs all the way through to government departments, that could be just internalising this area, could probably be doing so a bit more relative to the need of it and the time it will probably take to actually work out what the real potential in each of these areas are. But I think fundamentally you can have, you know, truly kind of cyclical, circular energy, renewable energy systems in the future as much as you can, sustainable agricultural systems that aren't just low carbon or carbon neutral, but potentially over a life cycle net carbon negative.
Yeah, and so it sounds good. Where do we learn more?
You can go to our website. We've got an FAQ section that sort of says where we are and what's happening next. And we've got quite a hopefully quite helpful blog as well, which actually unpicks and discusses a lot of the areas around.
And the website address is?
That's very helpful. It's at virginearth.com, or just Google Virgin Earth Challenge and it'll come up and you'll find it.
Great. David, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, John.